Welcome to the True Crime Studio. Today's story is a gripping tale of power, betrayal, and unexpected courage. When a billionaire forces his son into an arranged marriage for business, the bride's hidden secret changes everything. What begins as a calculated deal turns into a fight for justice and redemption. If you love stories full of twists and resilience, hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the True Crime Studio for more incredible tales. Let's dive into this unforgettable journey.
The clink of crystal glasses echoed through the sprawling Caldwell estate as Arthur Caldwell, the kingpin of a billion-dollar empire, surveyed the opulence around him. Every inch of the room screamed wealth: marble floors, gilded chandeliers, and an unbroken sea of power players sipping on rare vintages. But Arthur's piercing blue eyes weren't focused on the luxury. They were fixed on his son, Ethan, standing stiffly by the bar. "Ethan," Arthur said, his voice sharp and commanding as he beckoned his son to his side. Ethan Caldwell's jaw tightened. At 28, he was tall, broad-shouldered, and impeccably dressed in a custom suit that Arthur had likely picked for him. He looked every bit the heir apparent, but the flicker of rebellion in his eyes hinted at a man unwilling to be molded. With a reluctant sigh, he stepped forward. "Yes, father?" Ethan asked, barely masking his disdain. Arthur's lips curled into a thin smile, the kind that sent shivers through his competitors. "It's time we discussed your future. Sit." Ethan didn't bother hiding his irritation but complied, sinking into the leather chair opposite his father. Arthur wasted no time, launching into the real reason for tonight's gathering. "You're marrying Amara Daniels." The words hung in the air like a bomb. Ethan blinked, momentarily stunned. Then he laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You're joking." Arthur leaned forward, his expression stone cold. "I've never been more serious." Ethan shot to his feet. "You're out of your mind if you think I'm agreeing to some arranged marriage in 2024. What century are you living in?" Arthur remained seated, unbothered by Ethan's outburst. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass before speaking, his tone calm but lethal. "This isn't about you, Ethan. It's about the business." Ethan's fists clenched. "Of course it is. Everything is." Arthur's voice dropped lower, the warning unmistakable. "Her father controls one of the largest logistics firms in the country. Securing this merger guarantees dominance for our empire. Without it, you can kiss your inheritance goodbye." Ethan's breath hitched. As much as he hated his father's control, the thought of walking away from everything, his legacy, his lifestyle, was unbearable. Arthur knew this, and he exploited it ruthlessly. "This isn't just business," Arthur continued, his voice softening in a mockery of paternal concern. "Amara is suitable, beautiful, intelligent. She'll bring dignity to the Caldwell name." Ethan's laugh was hollow. "And what does she get out of this? Or does her opinion not matter either?" Arthur smirked. "She knows her place in this arrangement." Across town, in a modest but well-kept apartment, Amara Daniels sat across from her parents. The tension in the room was suffocating. Her father, Robert Daniels, a stoic man with gray streaks in his hair, paced the room while her mother, Clara, wrung her hands nervously. "You can't force her into this." Clara finally burst out, her voice trembling. "She's our daughter, not a bargaining chip." Robert stopped mid-stride, his gaze heavy on Amara. "It's not like that," he said quietly. This is an opportunity." Amara, 26 years old, with smooth brown skin and sharp, intelligent eyes, held her father's gaze. "An opportunity for whom?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "For all of us," Robert replied. "The Caldwell merger will secure our company's future. Without it, we'll lose everything. And they've made it clear, the deal only happens if you marry their son." Clara's gasp filled the room. "You can't be serious, Robert. Amara deserves better than this." Amara felt a lump rise in her throat, but she swallowed it down. She had always been the strong one, the one who held her family together during hard times. And now, they were asking her to sacrifice again. "I'll do it," she said, her voice calm but resolute. Clara's eyes widened in horror. "Amara, no." Amara reached for her mother's hand, squeezing it gently. "We can't afford to lose everything, Mom. If this is what it takes to protect us, I'll do it." The engagement dinner was a study in contrasts. Arthur's opulence was on full display as the Caldwell estate shimmered under the glow of countless lights. Ethan stood at the edge of the room, nursing a glass of whiskey and glaring at his father from across the crowd. Amara entered the room, escorted by her father. She wore a sleek, emerald green gown that hugged her slender figure, her long, wavy hair cascading over one shoulder. She was the picture of grace, but her eyes betrayed her unease. Whispers rippled through the room as the guests noticed her. "She's beautiful," one woman murmured. "Yes, but you know how people talk," another replied, her tone dripping with condescension. Ethan noticed the shift in the room's energy and turned toward the entrance. When his eyes landed on Amara, he felt a pang of guilt. She hadn't asked for this any more than he had. Still, guilt didn't stop the bitterness rising in his chest. "Let's get this over with," he muttered, approaching her. "Ethan," Arthur called out, his voice loud enough to gather the room's attention. "Come meet your fiancé." Amara lifted her chin, meeting Ethan's gaze as he approached. Her eyes were guarded but unflinching. He extended a hand, and she took it, her touch cool and steady. "Amara," Ethan said stiffly, "welcome to the circus." Her lips curved into a small, wry smile. "Glad to be here." Later that evening, as the festivities wound down, Amara excused herself and wandered into the mansion's library for a moment of solitude. The grand room was lined with shelves of leather-bound books and smelled faintly of aged paper and cigar smoke. She let out a slow breath, savoring the quiet. "You shouldn't be here," a voice drawled behind her. Amara turned sharply to see Gerald Harper leaning against the doorway. His smile was oily, his eyes dark with malice. "I'm a guest," Amara replied, her voice steady despite the unease creeping through her. Gerald stepped closer, his presence oppressive. "You may have fooled Arthur, but you don't belong here. Women like you, they don't last in this world." Amara's fists clenched at her sides. "Excuse me," she said, brushing past him. As she left the room, she could feel his gaze burning into her back. When she returned to her suite, she found an envelope waiting on her bedside table. Her name was scrawled across it in sharp, unfamiliar handwriting. She opened it cautiously, her heart pounding. Inside was a single piece of paper with a chilling message. "Stay quiet, or you'll regret it." Amara's grip on the note tightened, her mind racing. The first cracks in the facade of her new life had appeared, and she knew the storm was just beginning. The Caldwell estate was alive with the hum of orchestrated perfection. Arthur had spared no expense for the wedding. A towering archway of white roses framed the ceremony site, and glittering crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling of a custom-built marquee. It was a spectacle designed not for the bride and groom, but for the guests, a show of wealth and power. Amara sat in the bridal suite, staring at her reflection in the gilded mirror. The makeup artist had done her job well, emphasizing her high cheekbones and almond-shaped eyes. But Amara felt like a stranger in the ivory lace gown that clung to her slender figure. It was beautiful but suffocating, a symbol of the gilded cage she was about to step into. Clara fussed with the veil, her hands trembling. "You don't have to do this, Amara. We can find another way." Amara turned to her mother, her expression calm but resolute. "It's done, Mom. We need this." Before Clara could respond, the door opened and Robert entered. His face was drawn, his shoulders tense. "They're ready." Amara stood, smoothing her gown. Her father placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice low. "You're stronger than any of them will ever know." She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat, with her parents flanking her. Amara walked out of the suite and into the storm. The ceremony was a surreal blur. Ethan stood at the altar, his jaw clenched so tightly Amara wondered if it would crack. His dark eyes met hers as she approached, and for a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of something. Pity, perhaps, or understanding. It vanished as quickly as it appeared. The officiant droned on about love and commitment, words that felt hollow in the tension-laden air. Amara barely heard the vows she repeated, her focus instead on the sea of faces watching her. Some whispered, others stared with poorly concealed disdain. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, Ethan hesitated for a fraction of a second before leaning in. His kiss was perfunctory, a formality that barely brushed her lips. The applause that followed was polite but strained. As they turned to face the crowd, Amara whispered under her breath, "Smile. They're watching." Ethan's lips curled into a smirk. "I could say the same to you." The reception was a masterclass in passive aggression. Arthur played the benevolent patriarch, introducing Amara to every guest with the same thinly veiled condescension. "Isn't she stunning?" he said to one guest, his tone dripping with performative approval. A perfect addition to the Caldwell legacy. Ethan stayed by her side, his silence a barrier between her and the endless stream of probing questions. Amara found herself smiling through gritted teeth as one guest after another commented on her exotic beauty, or asked if she felt overwhelmed by her new life. The tension escalated when Gerald Harper approached. His predatory smile widened as he extended a hand to Ethan. "Congratulations, son. Your father must be proud." Ethan accepted the handshake begrudgingly, his grip firm. "Gerald." Gerald turned to Amara, his gaze lingering too long. "And you must be the lucky bride." Amara met his gaze with icy composure. "That's one way to put it." Gerald chuckled, leaning closer. "I hope you know what you're getting into. This world can be unforgiving." Ethan stepped between them, his tone sharp. "That's enough, Gerald." Gerald raised his hands in mock surrender, his smile never wavering. "Just making conversation. Enjoy the evening." As he walked away, Amara exhaled, her hands trembling slightly. Ethan noticed but said nothing. Later that night, Ethan and Amara retired to the bridal suite. The room was as lavish as the rest of the estate, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the moonlit gardens. A bottle of champagne sat on the marble table, unopened. Ethan loosened his tie, his movements stiff. Well, that was a nightmare. Amara slipped out of her heels, her feet aching. "I'm sure it was harder for you than me." He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "What's that supposed to mean?" She met his gaze evenly. "It means I'm not blind to how much you hate this." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, letting out a bitter laugh. "You think I'm the only one? Don't pretend you wanted this any more than I did." Amara's silence was answer enough. She moved to the window, staring out at the garden. The weight of the day pressed down on her, but she refused to let it break her. "I don't know why you agreed to this," Ethan said, his voice softer now. "But if you think my father's going to make this easy for you, you're wrong." Amara turned to face him. "I don't expect easy." Ethan studied her for a moment, something shifting in his expression. "Good. Because easy isn't in the Caldwell vocabulary." He left the room without another word, the door clicking shut behind him. Amara stood there, alone in the silence, her reflection in the window staring back at her. The threat from the letter echoed in her mind. "Stay quiet, or you'll regret it." As the night deepened, Amara found herself unable to sleep. She wandered through the mansion, her bare feet silent on the cold marble floors. The grand corridors felt oppressive, the air thick with the weight of unspoken secrets. She ended up in the library, drawn to its quiet solitude. The scent of leather and old books was comforting, a reminder of simpler times. She ran her fingers along the spines of the books, her mind racing. A rustle behind her made her freeze. She turned to find Gerald standing in the doorway, his smile as sinister as ever. "You really shouldn't wander around alone," he said, his voice low and mocking. Amara's heart pounded, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I can take care of myself." Gerald stepped closer, his presence suffocating. "I don't doubt that. But you should know, people like you don't last in this world. Arthur may tolerate you for now, but when you're no longer useful..." He let the threat hang in the air. Amara stared him down, refusing to let him see her fear. "You don't scare me, Mr. Harper." His smile widened. "Oh, I think I do." He left her standing there, the echo of his footsteps fading into the night. Amara leaned against the bookshelf, her breath shaky. The game had only just begun, and the stakes were higher than she'd ever imagined. Amara's first few weeks as Mrs. Ethan Caldwell felt like an endless cycle of events, each one more suffocating than the last. She awoke every morning in a room that seemed designed to impress rather than comfort. The bed was too large, the sheets too crisp, the walls adorned with paintings of aristocrats who looked down on her as if she were nothing more than an accessory. The mirrors, everywhere she turned, reminded her of how little of herself remained. The Caldwell mansion, a sprawling estate tucked in the heart of an affluent neighborhood, was a gilded prison. Though the marble floors gleamed, and every corner sparkled with wealth, Amara could sense the rot beneath it all. The quiet, insidious racism, the whispers behind her back, the subtle glances of judgment from the staff. It was all there. Amara sat at the grand dining table one morning, her fingers tracing the edge of the silverware as she waited for Ethan. The breakfast was immaculate, of course. Fresh croissants, eggs Benedict, and coffee brewed from beans so expensive that the price alone made her sick. "Good morning, Amara," came the soft voice of Margaret, one of the servants. Amara glanced up to see her, the older woman offering a tight smile as she placed a delicate china plate in front of her. "Good morning, Margaret," Amara replied, her voice flat. She wasn't sure if the servant's smile was genuine or just another form of careful politeness, but it didn't matter. The isolation here was palpable. It wasn't until Ethan finally appeared, his usual scowl in place, that the silence was broken. He sat across from her, the distance between them almost symbolic of their strained relationship. The wedding had been a transaction, nothing more. But the reality of living it out was harder than Amara had expected. "You don't need to keep pretending this is a family," Ethan muttered, poking at his eggs without looking up. "It's all business, Amara." She glanced at him, unable to hold back the bitterness that crept into her voice. "What did you think this was going to be, Ethan? A love story?" He stiffened, his eyes flashing with annoyance. "I didn't sign up for this either," he said quietly. "My father's the one behind all of this." Amara paused, studying him. There was more to Ethan than he let on, but it wasn't enough. He was still bound by his father's chains. "Then we're both prisoners here," Amara said, the words biting, but also tinged with a bitter truth she had no intention of hiding. Ethan shot her a glare, but there was something in his eyes now, something unspoken that lingered between them. It wasn't sympathy. No, that would be too easy. It was something else, something darker, something she wasn't sure she wanted to understand. The days became a blur of social gatherings, private meetings, and suffocating expectations. Arthur Caldwell continued to hold the reins, demanding Ethan's presence at every event, pushing him toward people who would advance the family legacy. It wasn't until one particularly bleak afternoon that Amara was forced to confront the reality of her new life. She was alone in the vast sitting room when the door opened without warning. "Gerald Harper." "Amara," he said, his voice dripping with false warmth as he stepped into the room. "How are we settling in?" Amara didn't bother hiding her disgust. "How do you think?" she said flatly, her eyes never leaving his. Gerald smirked, strolling over to her as if he owned the room. "I must admit, I never expected you to be so composed. For a woman like you, this could be a golden opportunity." Amara raised an eyebrow. "I'm sure it is." He leaned forward, the malicious glint in his eyes only growing sharper. "Just remember, your place in this family isn't just about your looks or your charm. You're a means to an end. You'll need to learn your role quickly. And don't think Ethan will be any help. He's weak. The only thing keeping him in line is his father's money." The words stung, not because they were new to her, but because they felt like a reflection of everything she feared about her marriage. "I've learned to survive in far worse situations than this," she replied coolly, meeting his gaze with defiance. "I'll be just fine." Gerald laughed, the sound dark and cruel. "We'll see about that." He stepped back, his eyes lingering on her a moment longer before he turned and left the room without another word. Amara was shaken, but only for a moment. She had endured worse. Much worse. Ethan continued his emotional distance from her. She was a tool in his father's game, nothing more. Yet, as the weeks passed, the cracks in his carefully constructed armor began to show. He would glance at her during dinners, his eyes momentarily softening, but he quickly turned his gaze away when she caught him looking. It was as if the weight of their situation was finally sinking in. One evening, after a particularly lavish gala thrown in their honor by Arthur's business partners, Amara found herself standing alone on the balcony, staring out at the city below. She needed a moment of peace, a break from the suffocating expectations. "I didn't think I'd find you here," Ethan said, his voice a little softer than usual as he stepped onto the balcony behind her. Amara didn't turn to face him. "Where else would I go? Your father keeps me locked up in here like a prisoner." Ethan didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, there was a hint of something unfamiliar in his voice. "This isn't easy for me either. You know." Amara glanced over her shoulder at him, her gaze piercing. "Then why don't you do something about it?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped beside her, both of them leaning on the balcony railing in silence. The noise of the gala seemed distant here, like they were in another world altogether. For a brief moment, they existed in the same space without the weight of their roles hanging over them. But that moment didn't last. It never did. Days passed in a haze of tension and discomfort, but Amara's resolve never wavered. She could feel the walls closing in on her, and every passing day made her more determined to get out, to find a way to break free. She wasn't going to be just another pawn in Arthur's empire, no matter what it took. One morning, she received a letter. The handwriting was familiar, Gerald's. Amara opened it with trembling hands. The words were short but ominous. "The clock is ticking, Amara. Don't make me remind you what happens when you outstay your welcome." Her breath caught in her throat as her mind raced. Gerald wasn't just making idle threats. He was laying down the gauntlet, and she knew the consequences of ignoring him could be catastrophic. She crumpled the letter in her hand, her jaw tight with fury. It wasn't enough that she had to marry Ethan. Now, she had to fight a war on two fronts, against the man who controlled her life and the man who owned her marriage. And she had no choice but to play the game. The library was quiet, save for the occasional crackle of the fireplace. Amara sat at the desk, staring at the dossier she had found in Arthur's office earlier that day. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages, each document a thread in a web of corruption. Financial statements, falsified reports, and records of secret meetings were all laid bare before her. But what chilled her to the core was the final file in the stack. A newspaper clipping from years ago about a young woman who had gone missing under suspicious circumstances. Amara recognized the name instantly. It was someone she had known in her old life, someone who had tried to fight back against Gerald Harper and had disappeared without a trace. Her breath quickened as the memories flooded back. Years earlier, Amara had been a bright, ambitious college student working part-time at a high-end restaurant. It was there that she first encountered Gerald Harper. He was a regular patron, always seated at the most expensive table, always surrounded by an entourage of sycophants. First, she thought nothing of him, just another entitled businessman flaunting his wealth. But one night, Gerald had stayed late, insisting that Amara serve him personally. His comments had started off as harmless flattery, but they quickly turned into something far more sinister. He had cornered her in the back of the restaurant, his hand gripping her wrist tightly as he whispered threats disguised as compliments. "You're too beautiful to waste your time here," he had said, his smile sharp and menacing. "Let me take care of you." Amara had managed to pull away that night, but it wasn't the end. Gerald had pursued her relentlessly, his advances growing more aggressive with each rejection. She had gone to the restaurant's management, but they had dismissed her concerns, unwilling to alienate a wealthy client. It was only when another waitress, a friend of Amara's, came forward with similar complaints that they realized the gravity of the situation. But before they could act, Gerald's power came into play. The waitress vanished without a trace, and Amara was left shaken, knowing that she could be next. Now, years later, that same man was back in her life, and his threats were as potent as ever. The note he had left her after the wedding was a stark reminder of the danger she was in. But this time, she wasn't a powerless waitress. She had resources now, and she intended to use them. She closed the dossier and leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. She needed a plan. Gerald wasn't just a threat to her. He was a threat to anyone who crossed him. And then there was Arthur, the man who had orchestrated this marriage, who had likely known all along about Gerald's crimes and had chosen to protect him for the sake of their business dealings. Amara clenched her fists. She wouldn't let them win. Not this time. The next morning, Amara confronted Ethan. He was in his study, hunched over his laptop, his expression dark and brooding. She shut the door behind her, and he looked up, startled by her sudden presence. "We need to talk," she said, her tone firm. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "About what?" She hesitated, wondering how much she could trust him. But if she wanted to take down Gerald and Arthur, she would need an ally. And Ethan, despite his flaws, was the closest thing she had to one. "Gerald Harper," she said, watching his reaction closely. Ethan stiffened, his jaw tightening. "What about him?" Amara stepped closer, her voice lowering. "I know what he's done. I know about the women he's hurt, the lives he's ruined. And I know your father has been covering for him." Ethan's expression darkened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I do," she countered. "I've seen the files. I've seen the lengths your father has gone to in order to protect him. And I know you've seen it, too." Ethan looked away, his hands clenching into fists. For a moment, Amara thought he would deny it again. But then he sighed, the fight draining out of him. "What do you want me to do?" he asked bitterly. "Confront my father? Bring down the entire family business? You think I haven't tried?" Amara stepped closer, her voice softening. "I think you're tired of living in his shadow. I think you want to do the right thing, but you're afraid of what it'll cost you." Ethan's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of vulnerability. "You don't know what you're asking." "Yes, I do," she said, "because I've already lost everything once. And I'm not going to let them take anything else from me." That evening, Amara received an unexpected visitor. Margaret, the servant she had grown closest to in the house, slipped into her room with a nervous expression. "I shouldn't be doing this," Margaret whispered, holding out a small envelope, "but I thought you should see it." Amara took the envelope, her heart pounding. Inside was a photograph of Gerald and Arthur in a private meeting, along with a handwritten note. "The truth always comes out." "Who gave this to you?" Amara asked, her voice trembling. Margaret shook her head. "I don't know. It was left in the kitchen for me to deliver." Amara stared at the photograph, her mind racing. Someone else in the house knew the truth. Someone was trying to help her. But who? The next day, Amara decided to confront Arthur. She waited until he was alone in his office, sipping his morning coffee and reading the financial reports. She stepped inside without knocking, the photograph clutched tightly in her hand. Arthur looked up, his expression cool. "Amara, what can I do for you?" She slammed the photograph down on the desk, her eyes blazing. "You can start by explaining this." Arthur picked up the photograph, his face betraying no emotion. "Where did you get this?" "That's not the point," she snapped. "The point is that I know what Gerald has done, and I know you've been protecting him." Arthur leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "You've been busy, haven't you? Don't play games with me," she said, her voice rising. "You've been covering for a predator. You've put countless lives at risk, all for the sake of your business. Do you even care?" Arthur's expression hardened. "You don't understand the sacrifices it takes to build an empire. Sometimes, compromises have to be made." "Compromises?" Amara repeated, her voice trembling with rage. "Is that what you call protecting a monster like Gerald?" Arthur stood, his towering presence intimidating, but Amara refused to back down. "You're playing a dangerous game, Amara. You're not the first person to challenge me, and you won't be the last. But let me make one thing clear. You won't win." Amara met his gaze, her resolve unwavering. "We'll see about that." As she left his office, her mind was already working on her next move. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. But if Arthur thought she was going to back down, he was sorely mistaken. The tension in the Caldwell household was palpable. Days after her confrontation with Arthur, Amara found herself under constant surveillance. The staff, once neutral or indifferent, now avoided her entirely. Even Ethan seemed more guarded, though he hadn't confronted her about her escalating defiance against his father. Amara knew she had stirred the pot, but she wasn't finished. She had crossed the threshold of fear and was now fueled by a singular purpose: justice. It was late evening when Amara found Ethan in the greenhouse, one of the few peaceful places in the sprawling estate. The glass structure was filled with lush greenery, a surprising contrast to the cold, lifeless opulence of the mansion. Ethan stood near a row of orchids, staring blankly into space, a glass of bourbon in his hand. "You're hiding," Amara said as she approached. Ethan glanced at her but didn't respond. His silence spoke volumes, so she continued. "You think if you avoid everything long enough, it'll go away. It won't." He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You're awfully bold for someone who's walked into a lion's den." Amara crossed her arms, her gaze steady. "I don't have the luxury of running away. You do, but you're too scared to take it." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You don't know anything about me." "Don't I?" she shot back. "You're a puppet, Ethan. Your father pulls the strings, and you dance. But you're not just hurting yourself. You're letting him destroy everything and everyone around him." Her words struck a nerve, and he slammed his glass down on the nearest table, the sound echoing through the greenhouse. "You think it's that simple? You think I haven't tried to break free? Then try harder," Amara said, her voice unwavering. "Because if you don't, you're complicit." For a long moment, they stared at each other, the air between them charged. Then, without warning, Ethan stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Do you have any idea what he's capable of? What he's done to keep his empire intact?" Amara didn't flinch. "I know enough, and I'm not afraid of him." Ethan's lips twisted into a bitter smile. "Then you're either brave or stupid." "Maybe both," she replied. "But at least I'm not a coward." The words hung in the air, and for the first time, Amara saw something shift in Ethan's eyes. A flicker of respect, maybe even admiration. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the greenhouse. The next morning, Amara found Margaret waiting for her in the hallway. The older woman looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting someone to appear. "Mrs. Caldwell," Margaret whispered, "I need to speak with you, privately." Amara nodded, leading her into the sitting room and closing the door behind them. "What is it?" Margaret wrung her hands, her voice trembling. "I know what you're trying to do, and I want to help." Amara's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Why?" Margaret hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Because I've seen what this family does to people who cross them. I've worked here for years, and I've kept my head down, but I can't ignore it anymore. Not after what they've done to you." Amara's heart raced. "Do you have proof? Anything I can use?" Margaret nodded, pulling a small flash drive from her pocket. "This has recordings. Conversations between Mr. Caldwell and Mr. Harper. They think no one listens, but the walls have ears." Amara took the flash drive, her fingers trembling. "Why are you risking this?" Margaret's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Because someone has to stand up to them, and because I see the fire in you. You might be the only one who can stop them." Amara felt a surge of gratitude, but also a pang of guilt. Margaret was putting herself in danger for her. "Thank you," she said softly. "I won't let this go to waste." That evening, Amara found Ethan in the study, nursing another drink. She placed the flash drive on the desk in front of him, and he looked up in surprise. "What's this?" he asked. "Proof," she said simply. "Your father and Gerald, everything they've done. It's all here." Ethan stared at the drive, his expression conflicted. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you're not like them," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You've been trapped in their world, but you don't have to stay there. You can make a choice." He picked up the drive, turning it over in his hands. "You're asking me to go against my own father." "I'm asking you to do what's right," she replied. "Not for me, not even for yourself, but for all the people they've hurt." Ethan's gaze softened as he looked at her. For the first time, She saw vulnerability in his eyes, a crack in the armor he wore so tightly. "You don't give up, do you?" he said with a faint smile. "No," she replied, "and neither should you." For the first time since their marriage, Amara felt a glimmer of hope. Ethan might not be the hero she wanted, but he was beginning to show signs of becoming the ally she needed. That hope was short-lived. The next day, Amara received another letter, this one more direct than the last. It was delivered to her suite, left on the bedside table where only she would find it. "You're playing a dangerous game, Mrs. Caldwell. Back off, or you'll regret it." This time, there was no signature, but the implication was clear. Gerald knew she was digging, and he wasn't going to let her expose him without a fight. Amara felt her resolve harden. She had come too far to back down now. If Gerald wanted a war, he would get one. That evening, Amara confronted Ethan again, showing him the letter. His face darkened as he read it, and for the first time, she saw genuine anger in his eyes. "He thinks he can intimidate you," Ethan said, his voice low and dangerous. "He doesn't know you very well, does he?" Amara raised an eyebrow. "What are you going to do about it?" Ethan's gaze met hers, and something shifted between them. "Whatever it takes," he said simply. Amara felt a spark of something she hadn't expected, trust. For the first time, she believed that Ethan might stand by her side, even if it meant going against his father and Gerald. Together, they might just have a chance. The Caldwell estate was eerily quiet. It was the calm before the storm, and Amara could feel it in her bones. She stood by the window in her suite, watching the distant city lights flicker like fireflies in the night. Somewhere out there, Gerald Harper was plotting his next move. Somewhere in this very house, Arthur Caldwell was spinning another web of lies. And yet, she had never felt more resolute. She glanced at the clock. It was almost time. In the days leading up to her decision to act, Amara had meticulously gathered her evidence. The flash drive Margaret had given her was a treasure trove of damning recordings, but it wasn't enough on its own. She had spent hours poring over documents she'd managed to copy from Arthur's office, cross-referencing names, dates, and figures. Every thread connected to a larger tapestry of corruption that extended beyond what she had initially imagined. Amara had also made contact with a journalist she trusted, an old college friend who now worked for a reputable investigative news outlet. Tonight, she would hand over the flash drive and everything else she'd compiled. Once the story broke, there would be no turning back. Arthur, in his usual fashion, had planned a gala to celebrate a new milestone for the Caldwell Empire. The guest list was a who's who of the elite, politicians, CEOs, and media moguls, all gathered under the guise of celebrating wealth and success. For Amara, it was the perfect cover. The ballroom was dazzling, with chandeliers casting golden light over a sea of impeccably dressed guests. Amara wore a sleek black gown that hugged her figure, her hair swept into an elegant bun. She moved through the crowd with practiced grace, a glass of champagne in her hand, her sharp eyes scanning the room. Ethan was by her side, his expression unreadable. Though their alliance had grown stronger, he still struggled to fully break free from his father's shadow. Tonight would test his limits. Arthur approached them, his smile as polished as the silver trays of hors d'oeuvres being passed around. "Ethan, Amara," he said smoothly, "you're the picture of a perfect couple." Amara resisted the urge to roll her eyes. "Your gala is lovely, Arthur," she replied, her tone measured. Arthur leaned in slightly, his smile never faltering. "Let's keep it that way, shall we?" Amara met his gaze, the tension crackling between them. Always. It wasn't long before Gerald Harper made his presence known. He approached Amara near the edge of the ballroom, his expression smug as he extended a hand. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, his tone dripping with mock sincerity. "You look radiant tonight." Amara's smile was cold. "Mr. Harper, always a pleasure." Gerald's eyes narrowed slightly. "Careful, my dear. You're starting to look defiant. That's a dangerous game to play." Amara tilted her head, her voice sweet but sharp. "And yet, I seem to be winning." Before Gerald could respond, Ethan appeared at her side, his presence a wall between them. "Is there a problem here?" Ethan asked, his voice low and steady. Gerald's smile returned, though it didn't reach his eyes. None at all. Just catching up with your charming wife. Ethan's glare didn't waver. Good. Then you'll excuse us? Amara allowed Ethan to guide her away, her pulse racing. She could feel Gerald's gaze boring into her back, but she refused to look back. As the night wore on, Amara began to execute her plan. She had planted copies of the most incriminating documents in strategic locations throughout the mansion. Arthur's office, the library, and even the coat check room. The journalist she had contacted was mingling among the guests, posing as a friend of a prominent politician. Everything was in place. But just as Amara prepared to slip away to meet the journalist, Gerald made his move. He intercepted her near the grand staircase, his grip firm on her arm as he steered her into a side room. Enough games, Amara, he hissed, his charming facade gone. I know what you're doing. Amara yanked her arm free, her eyes blazing. Then you know it's too late to stop me. Gerald's laugh was cold and sharp. You think you can bring me down? Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? I do, she shot back. And I'm not afraid of you. His expression darkened, and before she could react, he grabbed her wrist, his grip bruising. You should be. The door burst open, and Ethan stormed in, his fury palpable. Let her go. Gerald smirked but released Amara, raising his hands in mock surrender. Relax, Ethan. Just a friendly chat. Ethan stepped between them, his glare deadly. If you ever touch her again, I'll make sure you regret it. Gerald's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly, brushing past Ethan with a sneer. You're just as naive as she is. Amara's brush with Gerald only strengthened her resolve. As the gala reached its peak, she slipped out of the ballroom and made her way to the garden, where she had arranged to meet the journalist. The night air was cool, the scent of blooming roses a sharp contrast to the tension simmering inside her. The journalist was waiting near a fountain, her camera and notebook at the ready. Amara handed over the flash drive, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. Everything you need is here. Make sure the world sees it. The journalist nodded. You're brave, Amara. This could change everything. It has to, Amara replied. It's the only way. As she turned to leave, she heard the faint sound of footsteps. Panic shot through her, but before she could react, a hand clamped over her mouth, and she was dragged into the shadows. Amara struggled against her captor, her heart pounding as she realized who it was. Gerald's voice was a low growl in her ear. I warned you, didn't I? But you just couldn't listen. He dragged her deeper into the garden, his grip like iron. Amara fought back, kicking and scratching, but it was no use. Just when she thought all was lost, Ethan appeared, his expression a mix of rage and desperation. Let her go, Gerald. Gerald sneered. This doesn't concern you, boy. Ethan didn't hesitate. He lunged at Gerald, tackling him to the ground. The two men grappled, their struggle brutal and chaotic. Amara scrambled to her feet, her hands shaking as she watched in horror. Finally, Ethan gained the upper hand, landing a punch that sent Gerald sprawling. He stood over him, his chest heaving. If you ever come near her again, I'll destroy you. Gerald staggered to his feet, wiping blood from his lip. You're making a mistake, Ethan. You think she's worth it? Ethan didn't answer. He simply turned to Amara, taking her hand and leading her back toward the house. The Caldwell empire began to crumble the moment the story broke. The headlines were relentless. Caldwell Industries, a legacy of corruption and cover UPS. News anchors dissected every detail of the damning exposé. The evidence Amara had provided revealed decades of criminal activity, from money laundering to Gerald Harper's abuses, all carefully hidden under Arthur Caldwell's iron-fisted control. Amara watched the coverage from her suite, her emotions a mix of relief and apprehension. This was what she had fought for. But it was only the beginning. She knew men like Arthur and Gerald wouldn't go down without a fight. Downstairs, Arthur's study was a war zone. Papers and files were scattered across the desk and floor, the remnants of his futile attempts to contain the damage. His booming voice carried through the halls as he shouted into the phone. This is a coordinated attack. I want every legal team on this. Destroy that journalist. Shut it all down. His commands were met with silence from the other end of the line. No one wanted to fight a battle they knew Arthur had already lost. Ethan stood outside the study, listening to his father's tirade. Amara approached him cautiously, her presence a steadying force amidst the chaos. "He's unraveling," Ethan said quietly, his tone devoid of the usual bitterness. There was only exhaustion now. Amara nodded. "And he's dragging you down with him." Ethan glanced at her, his expression conflicted. "I never wanted this life, but walking away from it. You don't have to carry his mistakes," Amara said firmly. "You can choose a different path." Before Ethan could respond, Arthur's voice roared from inside. "Ethan, get in here." Ethan hesitated, but Amara gave his arm a reassuring squeeze. "Go," she said. "But remember, you're not him." Meanwhile, Gerald Harper was facing his own reckoning. The exposé had emboldened survivors of his abuse to come forward, their testimonies painting a horrifying picture of his predatory behavior. Legal investigations were opened, and Gerald's business partners began severing ties. Desperate, Gerald showed up unannounced at the Caldwell estate. He pounded on the front door, his face pale and drenched in sweat. When the butler hesitated, Gerald shoved his way inside, shouting for Arthur. Arthur emerged from his study, his face a mask of fury. "What the hell are you doing here?" "We're under attack," Gerald shouted. "The media's tearing us apart. You have to fix this." Arthur's lip curled in disdain. "I warned you to keep your house in order. Now your mess is dragging me down." "You knew." Gerald spat, his voice rising. "You covered for me. Don't act like you're innocent in this." Arthur's eyes narrowed. "And you're stupid enough to think I'll stick my neck out for you now? Get out of my house, Gerald. You're on your own." For a moment, Gerald stood frozen, disbelief etched across his face. Then he turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed through the mansion, a fitting symbol of the shattered alliance. That evening, Ethan found Amara in the library, seated at the desk where she had spent countless nights piecing together her evidence. The stacks of paperwork were gone now, but the weight of their actions lingered in the air. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about what you said." Amara looked up, her gaze steady. "And?" "You're right," he admitted, stepping into the room. "I've spent my whole life trying to please him, trying to live up to his expectations. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. And now, I see who he really is, what he's done." "And?" she prompted, her voice softer now. "And I'm done being his puppet," Ethan said, his tone resolute. "I don't want his money, his power, or his name. I want to build something better, something real." Amara smiled faintly, her respect for him growing. "That's a start." Ethan hesitated, then sat across from her, his expression earnest. "I need your help, Amara. You've already shown more courage than I ever have. I don't know how to fix this mess, but I want to try." She reached across the desk, her hand resting on his. "We'll do it together." The Caldwell empire didn't fall quietly. Shareholders panicked as the company's stock plummeted. Lawsuits flooded in, each one a nail in the coffin of Arthur's once mighty legacy. The board of directors, desperate to salvage what little was left, voted to remove Arthur from his position as CEO. The final blow came when federal investigators launched a probe into Caldwell Industries' financial practices. Arthur was summoned to testify, his every word scrutinized under the glaring lights of the media. Amara watched the coverage from the comfort of her modest new home, a sense of closure washing over her. She had fought for this moment, and now it was here. Gerald wasn't willing to go quietly. With his reputation in tatters and his assets frozen, he resorted to desperate measures. He filed a lawsuit against Amara, accusing her of defamation and alleging that she had fabricated the evidence against him. The case was a sham, and everyone knew it. The courts dismissed it within days, further humiliating Gerald. But the move revealed just how far he was willing to go to silence her. Ethan confronted Gerald in a hotel lobby shortly after the dismissal. The once powerful man was a shadow of his former self, his clothes rumpled and his eyes bloodshot. "You've lost, Gerald," Ethan said, his voice cold. "It's over." Gerald sneered, though it lacked the usual venom. "You think you've won? People like me don't lose. We adapt." Ethan leaned in, his voice low and dangerous. "Stay away from her. Stay away from us. If I see you again, you won't like the consequences." For the first time, Gerald looked genuinely afraid. He turned and walked away, leaving Ethan standing tall. With Arthur disgraced and Gerald defeated, Amara and Ethan decided to leave the past behind. They sold the Caldwell mansion, donating much of the proceeds to organizations supporting survivors of abuse and corporate corruption. Together, they moved into a modest but comfortable home in the city. For the first time, their lives felt like their own. One evening, as they sat on their small balcony overlooking the city, Ethan turned to Amara. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Amara smiled, her hand resting on his. "We didn't just do the right thing. We did the necessary thing." Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's strange. For so long, I thought freedom was about money and power. But now, sitting here with you, I finally feel free." Amara's smile widened. Together, they had torn down the corrupt empire that had tried to consume them. And together, they would build something new, something honest, something unbreakable. The sun rose over the city, casting a golden glow on the modest apartment Ethan and Amara now called home. It was a far cry from the cold, cavernous halls of the Caldwell estate, but it was theirs. For the first time in months, Amara felt the weight of fear and anger begin to lift. She sat at the small kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee in her hands, scrolling through the morning headlines. The Caldwell family's downfall had become a media sensation, and the coverage had only intensified since Arthur's removal as CEO. There was something surreal about seeing the story she had fought so hard to expose become public knowledge. Ethan entered the kitchen, his hair still damp from the shower. He leaned against the counter, watching her with a small smile. "Anything interesting?" he asked. Amara looked up, her lips curving into a smirk. "Your father made the front page again." Ethan chuckled, though there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "Let me guess, Arthur Caldwell's empire in freefall?" "Close enough," she replied, setting her phone down. "How are you feeling about all of this?" He hesitated, then shrugged. "Relieved, angry, guilty. It's a mix." "You did the right thing," Amara said gently. "That's what matters." Ethan nodded, his gaze steady. "I just wish I'd done it sooner." While Amara and Ethan were beginning to rebuild their lives, Arthur was living in the ruins of his own. He had retreated to a small, nondescript apartment after being ousted from the company. The once mighty patriarch now lived in relative obscurity, his days spent dodging reporters and ignoring calls from creditors. Amara had no intention of visiting him, but when a letter arrived in the mail, addressed to her in Arthur's handwriting, she couldn't ignore it. The envelope was plain, the message inside brief. "If you still have any decency, come see me. There's something you need to know." Against her better judgment, Amara agreed to meet him. She told Ethan, who insisted on accompanying her. But she refused. "This is something I need to do alone," she said. Arthur's apartment was sparse, a far cry from the opulence he once enjoyed. When Amara entered, she found him sitting in a worn armchair, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked older, the lines on his face deeper, his once intimidating presence diminished. "You came," he said, his voice raspier than she remembered. "Why am I here, Arthur?" Amara asked, crossing her arms. He gestured to the chair opposite him, but she remained standing. With a sigh, he leaned back and began to speak. "I made mistakes," he said, his tone weary. "I let greed blind me. I thought I could control everything. Gerald, the company, my family, but I was wrong." Amara raised an eyebrow. "Is that supposed to make me feel sorry for you?" "No," Arthur replied, meeting her gaze. "It's supposed to make you understand. What I did to your family. It wasn't personal. It was business." Her stomach tightened. "What are you talking about?" Arthur's lips pressed into a thin line. "Your parents' financial troubles. The reason your father agreed to this marriage, It wasn't an accident. I orchestrated it. Amara felt the air leave her lungs. You ruined my family to manipulate me? Arthur didn't deny it. I needed leverage. You were the key to securing the deal. And I knew your father would do whatever it took to protect his legacy. Rage bubbled inside her, but she forced herself to stay calm. Why are you telling me this now? Arthur's gaze dropped to his whiskey glass. Because I'm done fighting. I've lost everything. My company, my son, my reputation. The least I can do is give you the truth. Amara stared at him, her hands trembling. For so long, she had dreamed of this moment, of confronting the man who had caused her so much pain. But now that it was here, it felt hollow. You're right, she said finally. You have lost everything, and you deserve it. Without another word, she turned and walked out, leaving Arthur to drown in his regrets. While Arthur faced his self-imposed isolation, Gerald Harper's fate was far more public. The mounting lawsuits and criminal investigations left him with no choice but to flee the country. Reports surfaced of him living in a remote villa somewhere in South America, a far cry from the lavish life he once enjoyed. Amara and Ethan watched the news coverage together, a sense of closure settling over them. Gerald's downfall was complete, and he was no longer a threat. He'll never be able to hurt anyone again, Ethan said, his arm draped around Amara's shoulders. That's all I ever wanted, she replied. With the past behind them, Amara and Ethan began to focus on their future. They launched a non-profit organization dedicated to helping survivors of abuse and corporate exploitation, using the proceeds from the sale of the Caldwell estate to fund its initiatives. The work was hard but fulfilling, giving them both a sense of purpose. One day, as they were finalizing plans for a fundraiser, Ethan turned to Amara with a mischievous grin. You know, I've been thinking, we should take a vacation. Amara raised an eyebrow. A vacation? We're barely a year into this. Exactly, he said. We deserve a break. Just you, me, and a beach somewhere far away. She laughed, the sound light and carefree. I'll think about it. Years later, the nonprofit had grown into a thriving organization, its impact felt across the country. Amara and Ethan became known not for their connection to the Caldwell name, but for their commitment to justice and equality. One evening, as they sat together on their balcony, Amara reflected on how far they had come. The city lights stretched out before them, a reminder of the world they had fought to change. Do you ever think about the past? Ethan asked, his voice soft. Sometimes, Amara admitted, but only to remind myself of how much we've overcome. He nodded, his gaze thoughtful. I'm proud of you, you know, for everything. She smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. I'm proud of us. And as they sat there, wrapped in the quiet peace of their new life, Amara knew they had not just survived, they had triumphed.
Thank you for watching this powerful story here on the True Crime Studio. This tale reminds us that true strength lies in standing up for what's right, and love can conquer even the deepest divides. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the True Crime Studio for more compelling stories. See you in the next video.